Hello everybody, this is Phil Kern, the Tool and Die Guy, and tonight I want to talk to you guys a little bit about absolutes. And there are absolutes in every industry, and no more than the tool and die industry. And over the years, I've established some things that I believe have been my absolutes, and I know we have a talented group of people who watch these videos and they might disagree, and that's fine, but these are my absolutes. So, hey listen, I've only been doing this for almost 40 years, so I could be wrong here, okay? So absolutes, measuring, and you know, we all have our measuring equipment, but if you really need to get something really right, there's a few things that that are my go-tos, and this is going to be a two-part video because in one of my latest series on the toolandieguy.com, I'm teaching everybody how to grind a precision grinding vise, and I definitely need to work with absolutes to get this thing perfectly square, parallel, and flat. So the first absolute in this trade, as far as I'm concerned, is a granite surface plate. We know that that plate is perfectly flat, and you can't check something to be perfectly flat unless you have something to establish it to. And again, even absolutes have their own limits. Starrett makes great surface plates, and they even sell different grades. Okay. But, you know, a standard surface plate, unless you're like building nuclear reactors and need to measure to millionths every day, you know, standard black or gray surface plate, grade B or whatever they call it, they've got so many grades. I believe the standard, the top shelf surface plate is a pink granite plate, and you'll spend a lot for one of those. But there is a surface plate. That's the standard for flatness. It's been homed in and lapped in. It's perfect, okay? Next absolute in the trade that I consider are gauge blocks. And again, these are what you can trust. And I know there's, again, variations of absolutes. There are gauge blocks that are ceramic. There are gauge blocks that are, you know, grade A, grade B, grade C. But again, for the most part, any set of gauge blocks are going to be really close, okay? So you can decide how close you need to work. The third absolute that I learned about within the last few years were gauge pins. And you can measure holes all you want with your micrometers, your telescoping gauges, and your inside mics. But if a gauge pin doesn't fit into it, that's what I use now to measure my holes. And I'm lucky enough where I work, we have a great set from, you know, 60 thousandths up to, I think, almost an inch and a half. And there, we tend to use minus gauge pins, which are minus 0.00002, 2/10. So that way, as I always tell you, a 1-inch pin won't fit in a 1-inch hole. So to really check a 1-inch hole, you get a undersized gauge pin or a minus series, and it'll be 0.99998, and that'll slide in the hole, and you pretty much got a 1-inch hole. Okay, so gauge pins are another great way. Another absolute to me are my dial indicators. So when I use my dial indicators, gauge blocks, and a surface plate, I know that I'm as close as I can get. So let's stop right here. You know, everybody needs to know I'm a tool and die maker, not a gauge maker. So what I do is I go through my day, and as I check things, I decide on the tolerance what I need to check it with, okay? I mean, if a hole is plus or minus 10, you know, I'm not using gauge pins. Okay, I'm gonna just use a set of dial calipers. But if I really need to get a slot right, I'm going to use gauge blocks. So the tolerance, if something needs to be right there, and you need to establish a surface or a slot width or a hole diameter, you're either going to use gauge pins or gauge blocks or gauge pins. And if you really want to check the height of a block or a step on a block, you're going to use gauge blocks and dial indicator. That's the absolutes. Now, let's go back into some semi-absolutes. Micrometers, calipers. Let's go back to micrometers. I know there's going to be people watching this says, I can read my micrometers to 2/10. Yeah, well, if that's good, and but not everybody can. And what matters is that if you hand this pair of micrometers to anybody on the planet, you'll probably be plus or minus a half if you're doing really good, half thousandths. I doubt if you could hand that set of micrometers to 10 master craftsmen, they might even be plus or minus 2 or 3 tenths. It depends on the feel, because you could squeeze it. Okay, back to calipers. I always call these verniers. I think everybody goes by calipers now, but verniers I call verniers. And these tips wear out. These are plus or minus 5. Micrometers to me are plus or minus 1. But something's got to be right there. Gauge block, indicator. That's just the way it goes. So in this next part of the video, I'm going to show you, I've been doing some projects for the Tool and Die Guy site in our grinding series. I'm trying to grind up a precision grinding vise. And of course, I'm trying to make this thing perfect, and I'm dealing with things that aren't quite as perfect in the real world as they should be. So we're going to talk a little bit about grinding vices in the next segment of this video. So let's go there. You'll see this little vise I'm trying to grind up, and I've got a few opinions on that also. Alright, so in this section of the video, back to absolutes. Here's a project we're working on at the toolandieguy.com. My members we're learning how to grind this grinding vise square, flat, square, and parallel. And I roughed this out many years ago. I thought it'd be a good project to teach everybody how to get one of these as close as possible. And we're getting there with this. But one of the things I noticed is when you square these ends up, boy, you've got to have a good piece of equipment. Back to absolutes. How square do you need things to be? Now, if you're going to do this kind of stuff for a living, you've got to have some good equipment. I have a grinder vise very similar to this one at work, the old screw type grinding vise, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But back to absolutes. I had a friend of mine bring this in for me to really see how square I could get it. Now, here's an absolute for you. This says right here, this is a Hermann Schmidt vise, okay? Now, not only guaranteed to be flat, parallel, and square within 2 tenths, the second thing is he freezes these things. He deep freezes them so they're stable for years. The bottom is lapped in, and I think these are going for $8.75 now without a box. But you've got an absolute. Now you've got a grinding vise that's essentially perfect. Now when I square this up, and I set this vise in here, tighten this up, and stand it on its end, it's about as good as I'm going to get, okay, because I've got a perfect vise. Now, if you're doing this type of work all the time, a Schmidt vise is certainly worth it. The second thing, though, so let me just finish up on it. You're only going to be able to work as good as the equipment you have on hand, okay? So for those of you guys anybody will tell you, if you're going to get into precision grinding work, you got to have a Schmidt vise. That's just one absolute in the grinding room. Another thing would be a Schmidt squaring block, a magnetic squaring block, and for angles, a Schmidt sign play. I'm a really big believer in Hermann Schmidt, the best stuff ever, and I don't get paid to say any of that. I've always been so impressed with their stuff. Finally, I do want to talk to you about this. As I'm building this grinding vise, and I've got this is going to have the basic screw jaw here, screw jaw back and forth, just like this is the jaw here that we're not done grinding yet either. Then I've got this old vise, and this one's got a coarse thread on it. It goes a little faster. But I'm going to tell you right now, if you're opening and closing this thing all day, you're killing yourself and you're wasting a lot of time. You don't have to buy a Schmidt vise, but you can certainly make one like this. And they've got this little locking mechanism underneath. And basically you just push in on this, release your nut on your jaw, push in, and then you've got these different stops or slots in the bottom. So this is much faster to square up a lot of material with because you're just doing this. I mean, let's just get it loose. How fast is that? Instead of back and forth screwing it, okay? So not only is this an absolute for the tool room, if I ever had to build another vise, this is the way I would do it, okay? I mean, it just doesn't get any better than that. And he's got this so lapped in and designed, so this thing, you'll believe me, you won't have any issue squaring material up. But even though you might think, gee, that vise is floating, any vise jaw is floating. I'm dealing against gravity here. If I just let this thing sit down, it'll slide. So even if we go to this vise, there's got to be a little clearance in here, and all this tongue and this tang for this jaw, or this thing won't move. And what happens is people try to get them so close
one little piece of dust in there, and it makes it hard to turn. So, you know, these look very toolmakery, and they're cool looking, but they're slower than heck, boy. Back and forth all day. So whenever you can, try and copy the Schmidt design here. Don't buy them used on eBay. You don't know what people do to these things. You know, a guy finds it, leaves it in his garage, or thought he might, you know, I've known guys that, oh, it's not close enough, I can get it better. Well, I don't know why anybody would ever touch one of these things when they come out of the box. I mean, if you do spend the extra $95, you get the mahogany case too, and it comes with this cool little wrench that fits on the nut on the jaw. So again, guys, spend your money wisely. I'm sure there's imports that look kind of like this, but it's not a Schmidt, and this is a lifetime piece of equipment. You buy one of these, you're handing it down to your kids, okay? So I would highly recommend, if it were me, I would definitely buy new. And this fellow keeps a block of camphor in there. You get that at the pharmacy. It takes all the moisture out. And back to what I always tell you about a wooden box. Keeps the thing like brand new. This is about, I think, 20, 25-year-old vise. It's like brand new. So I'm Phil Kerner, the Tool and Die Guy. Talked a little bit about absolutes today. Talked a little bit about Hermann Schmidt, and we also talked about, let's maybe think about, look at that fine thread. To open this thing back and forth now, I'm going to be, you know, 3 or 4 minutes to get that thing back. I never quite understood why people go with the fine thread either. I don't know. Maybe they feel like it gives them a better feel, but at least with the coarse thread, it goes a little faster. But just some random thoughts on to end this video on toolmaker or grinding vices. And we'll see you in the tool room on the next video.